everyone. My name is Marcie LaCerte. I am the producer, editor, and art director of the show. Thank you guys so much for your support on the show so far, and we're really excited to talk a little bit about how we make this show, some information that Brian didn't get to include in season 1, and a little bit more about what's coming up next in the fall. We have a very special Patreon exclusive episode today, a Q&A with the host and narrator of our show, Brian Reinken. Brian.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here today and really looking forward to answering all of your questions. Thank you to all of you who've been listening over the past year. Thank you especially to our subscribers. I mean, we started this podcast and we didn't realize that we'd have people all around the world listening and caring about it. So it really means a lot. We're very, very grateful for your support. And we're really excited to do this today. And we hope that we'll have the opportunity to continue doing this for a long time. So thank you. It really does mean a lot both to me and to Marcie.
Yes, absolutely.
And just for clarity's sake, we've organized these into, there's 9 questions. We've organized them into 3 categories. The first is about the Victorian era. The second is about like the Victorian era today, how you might research it, how you might learn about it. And the third is behind the scenes of Melting Into Air.
So our first question comes from Yves LaCerte. He asks, did the Victorian era amplify the distrust of Catholicism? If so, would you provide some examples on how that was done?
Yes, so it's a great question. And I think in order to understand and appreciate the answer, you ultimately have to look back to why Catholicism was taboo in England in the first place. So this dates back, of course, to Henry VIII and the Reformation of the Church of England, when Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon, and marry Anne Boleyn, and basically ended up founding what we now call the Church of England, the Anglican religion. So Protestantism becomes tied to Britain at the level of the state. The head of state, the king or queen of Britain, is also the head of the Anglican Church. Then a few years later, 1688, there's the Glorious Revolution that overthrows the Catholic King James II, replaces him with a Protestant king, and then bans Catholics from holding most offices. After the Glorious Revolution, after 1688, English identity is tied so closely to Protestantism and particularly Anglicanism that for more or less a century, you can speak of these two things as essentially synonymous. So in our interview with Jonas Siegel, he talked a lot about how Victorians experienced Catholicism, especially when they went to Italy on vacation. And he had a formula that I think actually answers Yves' question quite well. He argued that across the 19th century, what we basically see is the legalization of Catholicism in British public life. So it becomes legally more acceptable. But then simultaneously, it retains its sort of countercultural substructure. So even though it's not illegal, it's still sort of taboo. It's still sort of attractive in that sense. So to take us to the start of the Victorian period would be in 1829, which is the passage of the so-called Catholic Relief Act, or also known as Catholic Emancipation. And why that act is significant is it allows Catholics to hold office in Parliament for the first time since the Glorious Revolution. And once Catholics are allowed to sit in Parliament, Catholic lawmakers begin to lobby for 2 things. Number 1 is the dissolution of the union between England and Ireland. They want an independent Ireland. And the second thing they're arguing for is the disestablishment of the Anglican Church in Ireland. So what that would mean is that Irish taxpayers, regardless of their faith, need to end up paying tithes or taxes that support a Protestant church. People who want to disestablish that church are called disestablishmentarians. This is also where we get that longest word in the English language, the anti-disestablishmentarians, and that is just people who are opposed to disestablishment. What happens in Ireland then is that by the mid-century, resistance to English rule is Catholic coded, which is a major turnaround because historically most Irish rebels had been Protestants. We think about people like Wolfe Tone, we think about people like Robert Emmet in the 18th century. These are all Protestants. But by the mid-19th century, we get the foundation of what's called the Fenian Brotherhood, which is a Catholic radical extremist organization, and it wages a terrorist campaign in the last decades of the 19th century. They assassinate high-ranking British colonial officials in Ireland. They're a predecessor to, Sinn Féin and the architects of the Troubles in the late 20th century. So in Ireland, you have that sort of evolution, the evolution toward radicalism after legalization. The story in Britain looks a little bit different. What we see is a survival of latent hostility to Catholicism, but it's coded differently now. Because after Catholic emancipation, after Catholic relief, you can be a Catholic in public life. It's subversive without actually being illegal, which makes it appealing to a number of different sort of countercultural types. So maybe the best place to look at some of this sort of latent hostility to Catholicism would be George Eliot's great novel, Middlemarch. This is sort of like the representative novel of the Victorian era. I think Virginia Woolf called it the only English novel written for adults. It's very famous. It's outstandingly influential. It was written in 1871, but it is actually set in 1829. It opens in the year of Catholic relief, of Catholic emancipation. So for the readers who are engaging with Middlemarch, they already knew the outcome of that historical act, but the characters don't. And the characters are uneasy at the relationship Catholicism has to English public life. There's a very famous scene in Middlemarch, one of my favorite scenes in all of Victorian literature, when the protagonist of this novel, Dorothea Brooke, goes on her honeymoon to Rome, and she spends time in the Vatican museums. And there's a quote I actually want to read from this book, and this is Dorothea in the Vatican museums. The weight of unintelligible Rome might lie easily on bright nymphs to whom it formed a background for the brilliant picnic of Anglo-foreign society. But Dorothea had no such defense against deep impressions. Ruins and basilicas, palaces and colossi, set in the midst of a sordid present, where all that was living and warm-blooded seemed sunk in the deep degeneracy of a superstition divorced from reverence. So in this quote and in the rest of the scene, what we see is Dorothea's attraction to Catholic art, potentially. It's something that has, great historical appeal, great aesthetic appeal, but simultaneously it remains something taboo. If you read the chapter as a whole, she feels oppressed by the weight of Rome upon her. It's too old, it's too ornate, it's too elaborate. It is full of knowledge, but it's potentially full of the wrong kinds of knowledge, Catholic knowledge. In Middlemarch, this notion of the Catholic Church is connected to her husband because she is on her honeymoon in the Vatican. Mr. Casaubon, her husband, is a failed scholar. He's constantly engaging in the wrong kinds of knowledge. He's propounding outrageous theories. And instead of spending time with his wife on this honeymoon, he's burying himself inside the Vatican museums. So Dorothea's suspicion to her resentment of her sort of strange fascination with Catholic art doubles that relationship she has with her husband. And ultimately what the novel ends up doing is retreating both from that marriage and from the allure of Catholicism and sort of taking refuge in English Protestantism again. Now, by the end of the century, we see another turn again, and this is toward a more avid, sort of countercultural, lurid Catholicism. This is the decadent movement. And people often describe the decadent movement as a kind of romanticism without political commitment. It shows a fascination with decay, with rot, with sensual excess, and it's coded very heavily on French fiction. So there's a novel by a French author named Jory-Carl Huysmans. It's called A Rebours, and that novel doesn't really have a plot. It just follows the protagonist as he goes through this mansion of sensual pleasures. There's a whole room full of various perfume dispensers, and he just loves to smell all these perfumes. There's a whole room of food where all the food is one color. He's eating these black banquets of food where every dish on the table is pitch black.
It's very, that sounds very, Daisies, Czech New Wave.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating book. And English readers of a certain type gobbled it up, and they started to replicate this kind of sensual, erotic conflation of desire with the fact that it's centered especially on Catholicism. There's that derogatory term about Catholic worship that it's just bells and smells. It's sort of appealing to your senses rather than your intellect. So a lot of these decadent writers at the end of the century are converting to Catholicism. We get Ernest Dowson, the poet who gave us many well-known lines in English literature, Gone with the Wind, Wine and Roses, so on and so forth. Oscar Wilde actually converts to Catholicism on his deathbed in 1900. And you can see the appeal that Catholicism might have for these countercultural writers. It's subversive, it's kind of exotic, it's foreign, without actually being anything that would put them in real political danger. They won't go to jail for becoming Catholics. And then just to put a bow on this answer, what we get at the end of the century then is sort of the sudden termination of that decadent movement. So William Butler Yeats wrote a kind of ironic history of the decadence, and he says that in 1900, suddenly, everybody got down off their stilts, nobody drank absinthe, nobody went mad, nobody committed suicide, and nobody converted to Catholicism. Or if they did, I have forgotten about it. Thanks for listening to this preview of Melting Into Air's bonus content. If you'd like to listen to the full-length episode, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/meltingintoair. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you so much to all of our supporters. Marcie and I are a small team, and your contributions help keep our show running.